It was supposed to be just another perfect Vegas show, until Frank Sinatra saw something in the crowd that made him stop mid-song and change everything. The night of November 15th, 1962, at the Sands Hotel would become legendary not for the music, but for what happened when the music stopped. The Copa Room was packed to capacity with the kind of crowd that made Vegas the entertainment capital of the world. 800 of Las Vegas's elite filled every seat. Hollywood producers, oil barons, casino owners, and socialites whose jewelry caught the stage lights like fallen stars. Their cigarette smoke created a hazy curtain that drifted upward toward the crystal chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated intimacy that was uniquely Vegas. Frank had already worked through his opening numbers with that effortless charm that made him the undisputed king of the Strip. "I've got you under my skin," had the women swooning. "That's life," had the men nodding along, recognizing themselves in every cynical line. The audience hung on every note, every gesture, every perfectly timed pause that separated good singers from legends. But tonight felt different to Frank, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Maybe it was the way the spotlight seemed softer, or how the faces in the crowd looked more open, more vulnerable than usual. Vegas audiences were typically sophisticated and slightly jaded, impressed by everything and moved by nothing. Tonight, they seemed ready for something real. As he moved into Fly Me to the Moon, something caught his eye in the amber glow of Table 17, tucked into the far corner near the mahogany bar, where the waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts between the tables. An elderly couple, probably in their 70s, sat holding hands across their small cocktail table. The woman wore a navy blue dress that spoke of careful savings and special occasions, her silver hair perfectly set in the style of another era. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she leaned forward to hear something her husband was saying. The man, distinguished despite his obviously modest background, wore a dark suit that had been pressed with care and probably borrowed from their best wardrobe for this once-in-a-lifetime trip to Vegas. He leaned close to whisper something in her ear, and when she laughed, it was the sound of shared history, of private jokes and comfortable intimacy that only comes from decades together. Frank continued singing, but his attention kept drifting to Table 17. There was something different about them, something that set them apart from the usual Vegas crowd of high rollers and celebrities. While everyone else watched him with the calculated appreciation of people who had seen it all, they were watching each other. The woman's eyes sparkled with tears that weren't sad but joyful, the kind that come from overwhelming gratitude for a moment you never expected to have. The man's weathered hand traced gentle circles on her palm, a gesture so automatic it spoke of decades of comfort freely given. They weren't here for the spectacle or the bragging rights. They were here because this song meant something to them, something that had nothing to do with Frank Sinatra's fame and everything to do with their own private history. In a room full of people trying to impress each other, they were simply being themselves. Halfway through the song, Frank heard it. During a brief instrumental break, the woman's voice carried just enough for him to catch the words. "Remember, Harold, our first dance? You were so nervous you stepped on my dress." The man chuckled softly. 50 years, Eleanor. 50 years, and you still remember." "How could I forget? This was our song." Frank's voice faltered for just a moment. 50 years. He looked at them again, really looked. The way she tilted her head when she laughed. The way he straightened his tie when she looked at him, still trying to impress her after 5 decades. Something shifted inside Frank's chest. He was singing about flying to the stars, about love and dreams. But here, 10 feet away from his spotlight, was the real thing. Not the Hollywood version or the Vegas fantasy, but actual, lived-in, worn smooth by time love. Frank stopped singing. The band, confused, continued for a few bars before gradually falling silent. The Copa Room went quiet except for the clink of ice in glasses and the distant sound of slot machines from the casino floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank said, his voice carrying that intimate quality that made everyone feel like he was talking directly to them. "I need to stop for a moment." The room buzzed with confusion. Frank Sinatra didn't stop shows. He was a professional, a perfectionist. What was happening? Frank walked to the edge of the stage, shielding his eyes from the bright lights, searching. Table 17 in the corner, the lovely couple in navy blue. 800 heads turned. Harold and Eleanor Morrison, married 50 years ago today, found themselves suddenly the center of attention. Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. Harold half rose from his seat. "Don't be embarrassed," Frank said gently. "I couldn't help but overhear. Today's your anniversary?" Harold nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. 50 years today, Mr. Sinatra." 50 years, Frank repeated, and there was something like awe in his voice. "And this was your first dance?" "Yes, sir," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible but somehow reaching every corner of the room. October 15th, 1912. Harold was 19, I was 17. We danced to this song at the Starlight Ballroom in Cleveland. Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than his audience had ever heard it. "You know what? I've been singing this song for years. I thought I knew what it meant, but I was wrong." He gestured to the lighting booth. "Jimmy, bring up the house lights on table 17. A warm golden spotlight suddenly illuminated Harold and Eleanor, and the rest of the Copa room dimmed. Now they were the ones on stage, and Frank Sinatra was in the shadows. "Harold, Eleanor," Frank said, "would you do me the honor of showing us what this song really sounds like?" The couple looked at each other, decades of silent communication passing between them in seconds. Harold stood slowly, his movements careful but dignified, and extended his hand to his wife. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Morrison?" "You certainly may, Mr. Morrison." As they moved to the small space beside their table, Frank began to sing again. But this time, he wasn't performing, he was witnessing. His voice became an instrument for their love story, every note a celebration of their half-century together. Harold's arms encircled Eleanor with the practiced ease of 50 years. She fit against him perfectly, her head resting on his shoulder exactly as it had in 1912. They moved slowly, carefully, but with a grace that made the elaborate dance numbers of younger couples look clumsy by comparison. The Copa room watched in absolute silence. Tough Vegas high rollers found themselves fighting back tears. Women clutched their husbands' hands. Young couples looked at each other and wondered if they would still be dancing together in 50 years. Frank sang the entire song for them, his voice wrapping around their quiet dance like a blessing. When he reached the final line, "In other words, I love you," Eleanor looked up at Harold and mouthed the words along with Frank. Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Eleanor, more now than I did 50 years ago." As the last note faded, the Copa room erupted in applause unlike anything Vegas had ever heard. It wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was a standing ovation for love itself, for the kind of commitment that lasts half a century, for the quiet heroism of growing old together. Frank wiped his own eyes, not caring that 800 people could see him cry. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Harold and Eleanor Morrison, married 50 years today. They just taught us all what fly me to the moon really means." The spotlight lingered on the couple for another moment as they returned to their seats, Harold carefully helping Eleanor with her chair, both of them glowing with embarrassment and joy. Frank started his next song, but the evening had changed. Every love song he sang seemed to be dedicated to Table 17. Every romantic lyric carried new weight, new meaning. The audience listened differently, loved differently, held their own partners a little closer. After the show, Frank made his way to Table 17. The Morrisons sat quietly, Eleanor's head on Harold's shoulder, both of them looking dazed by what had happened. "Thank you," Frank said simply. "You gave me something tonight. You showed me what I've been singing about all these years." Harold stood extending his hand. "Mr. Sinatra, we don't know how to thank you. You already did. 50 years of marriage, that's the greatest performance I've ever witnessed." Frank arranged for the couple to have the best suite in the hotel, for champagne to be sent to their room, for their anniversary dinner to be on the house. But more than that, he gave them something money couldn't buy, a moment when their private love became a public celebration, when their quiet devotion inspired a room full of strangers to believe in love again. That night, the Copa room at the Sands became something more than a showroom. It became a chapel, a place where love was honored not with flowers and vows, but with a song sung by the voice of a generation, and a dance danced by two people who had earned the right to show the world what forever looks like. The memory would outlast the hotel itself, outlast the era when Vegas was still small enough for such intimate magic. Years later, people who were in the Copa room that night would still talk about it. Not about Frank's voice, though it had been perfect as always. Not about the celebrity guests or the expensive champagne. They talked about Harold and Eleanor Morrison, about the way love looked when it had been tested by time and found unbreakable. The story spread through Vegas like wildfire. Other entertainers began looking for their own Table 17s, hoping to find moments of real human connection in the artificial glitter of the Strip. But most learned what Frank already knew. You can't manufacture authenticity. You can only recognize it when it appears and have the wisdom to honor it when you do. Frank kept in touch with the Morrisons. He sent them Christmas cards, called on their anniversaries. And when Harold passed away 7 years later, Frank quietly paid for the funeral. Eleanor lived another decade, and every year on November 15th, she would receive flowers with a card, signed simply, "From your friend in the spotlight." The night Harold and Eleanor Morrison danced at the Sands Hotel became part of Frank Sinatra's personal mythology. But more importantly, it became part of Vegas lore, a reminder that in a city built on illusion and make-believe, sometimes the most powerful moments are the most real. In the casino business, they talk about the house always winning. But that November night in 1962, love won. And Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, the king of Vegas, had been wise enough to know when to step aside and let it have center stage. The spotlight he gave away that night illuminated more than one couple's golden anniversary. It lit up the truth that the greatest shows aren't always the ones we plan. Sometimes they're the ones that happen when we have the courage to stop performing and start living, when we recognize that the most beautiful music isn't always the song we're singing. Sometimes it's the love story happening quietly in the back of the room, waiting for someone brave enough to turn the spotlight away from themselves and shine it where it belongs. Frank Sinatra had given away his spotlight that night, and in doing so, he had found something brighter than any stage light. The knowledge that the greatest performances aren't always the ones that make the audience applaud for you. Sometimes they're the ones that make you applaud for life itself.